Hi, and welcome to part two of our interview tips, where we're just having a brief conversation about what to do, what not to do, and what's good practice for interviews. So part one, we covered all about the preparation, what to do, what to wear, how to prepare, and all that kind of stuff. So now we're focusing more on the actual interview. So for me, it's always a case of I'm always thinking about the actual interview, that I don't want to talk too much, but I don't want them to think I'm just a yes, no type of person. So I think finding a balance of answers and the amount of time you're taking is really important for me. And in my preparation, I normally try and do a little bit of, I try and think of examples that I think, looking at the job description, my examples, what I think might work. But is there any tips you guys have that you've kind of have learned over the years about kind of what to, how to answer questions and stuff like that?
I have a few thoughts, if I may. I think one thing which people need to remember when answering questions is there's no rush. The interviewer isn't looking for how quickly you're going to answer the question. So don't be afraid to take a second and tell them you're taking a second, say, oh, that's interesting, just give me a second to think about that. And that allows you to sort of compose yourself. That means you're not just trying to speak quickly, you're actually sort of formulating an answer, and it both sort of like two sides of it. One, it shows them you're a thoughtful, considerate kind of person, and also it allows you to take your time and answer correctly rather than quickly.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I think it's also okay to sort of say that I need to think about that a bit longer and maybe skip a question as well. Can we come back to that question later? And like you said, taking your time and thinking through the answer before you start saying it, instead of just going ahead with the first thought in your head. Thinking through what you're trying to say with your answer can be quite helpful. So thinking before you go to an interview, thinking of a couple of examples of questions that you might have. So maybe talking to somebody who can give you ideas of types of questions that you can have. And also considering what you've done in that example when you do answer. So instead of saying, me and my friends did something, or we did as a family, or it's always good to say, I did something. I personally made sure we did this, because it shows that you are the person taking responsibility.
Yeah, I'll never forget in an interview a couple of years ago, I went and I was so used to saying we, because when you're actually working at a company, you normally say we, because you want to make sure your whole team is getting credit and you want the business to know it's us as a team. But in an interview, I remember someone actually gave me some feedback and said, you say we a lot. Like, what did you do? What was your part in that? And I was thinking, well, actually, my part was quite big, but maybe I haven't sold myself very well. But I think it's important to remember in an interview, they're interviewing you and not your whole team that you used to work with, previously. So I think that's really important. And we talked in the first part about kind of, it's okay to take a notepad in and take notes and things like that, because if you don't, it's probably a little bit strange. But what's good to take notes of? Because you don't want to be kind of head down the whole time, but what's kind of a good thing to just take note of and things like that might just help the interviewer know that, oh, actually, this is a serious person?
I think anything which is fundamental to the role in question. So if they say, and always look for phrases they use, like, we're really looking for someone that can do this, we'll make a note of something like that, because then it shows they've noted that we need somebody doing that, you know what I mean? So the key points that they pick out, probably you can tell by their sort of, their inflection, their sort of emphasis on the words, that sort of thing. I'd say make a note of those.
Yeah,
I agree on that. Actually, it shows that you're not listening if you're taking notes all the time. So throughout the interview, if all you do is take notes, you're not listening. So you're not actively listening to the person who's talking. So I think it's only when it's very much a priority for us that you know this, or note that down, or here are the core working hours or something that you need to know, then say, can I just note that down, because it sounds really important.
I've always tried to note just if there's any topic, like questions that I want to ask at the end, because I think I'll forget, and maybe it's not the right time to ask mid question, but you think I want to ask this. Because also asking questions, and that's my next question actually, what sort of questions should people ask? Because I think there is always a case where when I've been interviewing people, and when I ask, is there any questions you've got for me? And when they haven't got any questions, I always feel, do they want this role? Or is that a bit, I always think you should ask a question, even if it's just, what are the next steps? It's something. But I mean, is there any particular things you ask when you go for an interview? Is there, when you get the opportunity to ask them a question back, is there anything particularly you ask? Any kind of, things you remember from your past?
Yeah, I would first of all leave the questions to the end.
Yeah.
So I've interviewed some young candidates years ago who just asked questions throughout the interview, and it was quite disruptive. So just noting down the questions you have, but also do prepare. I find myself in interviews, I am so relieved I get to the end that I forget all of my questions. So for me, that's the time to take your notepad out and go, and by the way, people love talking about themselves. So I think it's good to show that you're prepared, but asking specific questions about, like, what's the team like? What's the manager like? Specifically getting the interviewee to sort of engage with you means that they personally like, oh, this person really wants to know what our team is like. But I definitely wouldn't ask questions as in salary, holidays. I would focus more on the team. What's the team like to work? What are the shifts, and specifics about the role itself?
Yeah.
I always think a good opening question, and all the questions I like to think, try and relate it to yourself being at the company and the company's goals. It's the typical, advice for somebody on a first date, ask them about themselves sort of thing. Well, I think a good opening question to sort of start a conversation at least is, why is this role available? What's the purpose of the role? Is it replacing somebody else? Is there a target that you're hoping to meet shortly? And that word I mentioned there, I think, again, is important, targets. So you can say to them like, okay, let's say I was to start working here, which again is a nice little psychological trick. It's sort of picturing you in the role. After 3 months, what would success look like? What do you want me to have achieved after 3 months? And again, puts them in the mind of, okay, and it starts getting them to feed you information about what it would take to succeed in a role.
And it also shows that you're thinking about the role and long term and stuff like that as well. I've always asked, I have a few set questions that I always ask. I think if there's something in the interview that doesn't come up that I don't think, like if I get to the end and my notebook is empty because for whatever reason, I have some set questions that I ask. And it's always, what's the team set up like? What's the culture like? What are the next steps? And I think they're always good questions just to show that you're keen and stuff. I think there's nothing worse than you finishing an interview and then you're not asking like, so what's next kind of thing? Because then it just shows that either you don't want the job, or you're not there. So I think that's kind of important. But it's also important, even you said kind of what not to ask as well. I mean, Adam, have you got any views on what's definitely not to ask?
I think so. Some of the ones we've already sort of brought up, like, you don't want to be seen of just focusing on the perks. I don't think that's the worst thing to ask, but stuff to ask like sort of anything with a sort of a negative connotation. So like, what should I avoid doing? Do you know what I mean? And not so much a question, but just a piece of advice. Phrases to avoid using are stuff like, to be honest. Because if you said on question number 4, well, to be honest, this, that, and the other, well, when you're being honest on the first 3, when you're being honest on, I sort of assumed that. Why are you saying you're being honest now? But yeah, anything with any sort of negative connotations, like what should I avoid doing? What have people got in trouble for? Anything like that. And any phrases which should be taken as granted, to be honest, honestly speaking, to be frank, anything like that, which you should be being all the time in an interview.
Is there anything you take with you? Do you have a set sort of routine? I mean, I know I always print out the job description. I normally print out my CV, and I have an extra copy to give to them just in case they haven't got it. They normally have, but it just shows that I'm prepared. And I also often print out, bits of their website or their social channels and stuff, just so it reminds me that, okay, they've got 3,000 employees and they're in 2 countries and their headquarters is just little things that I then can impress them with, because they can see that, oh, actually, he's done his research. Is there anything you guys have that kind of like that?
No, so I don't necessarily. I've got specific questions that I want to ask at the end. Specific sort of prepping for myself potentially that I would have had similar to you, like something about the company or the job description. and I always specifically prep an answer that I can bake into any question at all, where I can go, and at your company, I've noticed that you do this, or I read on your website, or I noticed that your website works in this sort of way, or looks really good, but specifically mentioning that I've researched the company in advance.
Adam, anything to add?
I mean, again, and other than what you've said, I do always try and keep an eye on some sort of latest press release or something they've done, you know, just so you can mention, oh, I saw that you recently you've started a new partnership with XYZ. Is that going to affect this role? Will I be involved with that at all? Yeah. So, but in terms of taking things with me other than a notepad, again, another tiny thing, I keep talking about like psychological tricks, but bear in mind, my background is marketing, so I'm always thinking about those. I always try, if I can, have a small accessory, maybe a tie, maybe a pocket handkerchief or something in their company colors. Because again, that just a little thing which sort of puts them in mind, oh yeah, he sort of looks like he fits in here. Do you know what I mean?
That's good. That's a good one, actually. I've never thought of that. There's not many things that people shock me with, and that has actually, because I've never thought of that. That's a really good thing. The other thing as well, just to mention, obviously, and we did talk about this a little bit in part one, but is at the moment, a lot of interviews are virtual at the moment during the pandemic, and sometimes you have telephone interviews. And I've always been told by sort of people, and my dad used to tell me this, that they're the best type because people don't know what's the other side of the screen. You could have notes there, post-it notes, stickers, you could have all this information that would help you. So if you do happen to be interviewing virtually, don't look at it as a negative that, oh, I really wanted to go there because I can show them how confident I am and how good I am. But actually use it to your advantage. You know, you can kind of have a lot of prep, or on the other, and nobody will ever know if you're just looking up every so often, because that's natural. So that's another tip that I've certainly learned. Not that I've had a virtual interview recently, but you know, if I ever do, that's certainly something I'm going to do. Is there any final kind of words of wisdom that you can think of just around that whole interview and stuff like that? Maybe last thing, actually, how long should you wait until you contact a company? Like, so, you know, if you haven't heard back for whatever reason, how people are probably thinking, should they chase? Should they not? Is it annoying? Is it not? I don't know. What are your views there?
And the ideal, of course, is, as we've already spoken about, you sort of find out what the next steps are, so that you should ideally know when you're leaving, when you're going to hear from them, that sort of thing. I would say if you haven't heard one day after a week, so 8 days later, that's probably a reasonable time to just chase and say, hi, just to let you know, there's anything else you need from me, anything else I should know, may I ask where we are in the process, something like, very polite, very sort of friendly, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. In many ways, it'll probably be impressive that you're keen. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say about a week as well. Leave it about a week, unless they specifically said we will definitely tell you tomorrow, and then you don't hear about it, then a couple of days is okay. And sometimes there's reasons why people haven't been in contact as well, so it might just be that person was away and nobody's been in contact with you for a few days, so no harm done chasing at all.
Yeah, great, cool. Well, hopefully part one and part two has helped people watching this just think about interviews. A lot of people potentially are going for interviews in the next few weeks, months. So good luck with them. Be confident. Think about all the kind of stuff we've talked about in both parts. And yeah, just go sell yourself, because, I'm sure you have something to offer. The fact that if you've got an interview, that means you've got past that first stage, which means they see something in you. You just have to open the doors and show them. So good luck, take care, and stay safe.